Okay, welcome to our peer learning group for January 2026. Yeah, Happy New Year, everybody. And today's workshop, and again, this is with Right to the City Alliance and just learning from each other. Today's topic is about discount sales. So, what are the options to work with folks who want to sell their home, either at a discount or donate property, etc. How does it work logistically, and how do you set up a program of your own, whether it's for your community land trust or nonprofit housing organization to create affordable housing while also benefiting folks in the community? So that's what we're here today, and we're excited to be joined today by Julia Lola, who is a recent person who sold their home at a discount to Indianapolis Community Land Trust, which I'm a part of. And then we also have Nicholas Johnson, who will be hopping on in just a few minutes, who's the board president of the Indianapolis Community Land Trust and also our legal counsel that helped work through the transaction that we did with Julia. So we'll start with just a couple intros. If people would like to share, just and maybe come off mute, just share where you're coming from today, zooming in from, and what inspired you to join the session today in a couple words.
I'm happy to get us started.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Jackie. Um, I am kind of interested in this call for a couple different reasons. I'm based in Indianapolis. I've been kind of loosely following the Indianapolis Community Land Trust for the past several years. And I currently work at the Coalition for Homelessness Intervention and Prevention. And I just think community land trusts are a very creative and way to create like affordable housing in perpetuity. I'm also a homeowner in Indianapolis, and so I want to learn more about what it might look like if I sold my home to the CLT. Thanks.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks for joining us. Who would like to check in next?
Hey, Sandy, I'll go next. Sandy Keller. I live in Northwest Indiana, LaPorte. I help run a nonprofit called Homeward Bound Villages, and we're building cooperative-based housing. We act as a land trust. And so, like our last intro, I have two reasons. One, so we build in a small kind of, we call it a village setting. And I just know like lots of things that are being done are to purchase a home where there's still land left to put other structures on, because we don't build a lot of units on one site, or churches that you can do that with. But I am also super interested in my own personal legacy with my own home.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandy. And let's kick it over to, is that Lady T?
Hey team, yeah, yes, Lady T. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. I'm checking in from DC. Sorry, picking up my kids, but yeah, I'm glad to be here. I think what interests me is right now, with the tenant associations that we're working with, we're in a slight transition of going from tenant associations to tenant unions, and essentially like using collective bargaining agreements, and that turning into a higher collective power of hopefully cooperatives. I know right now my leadership is looking into what land trusts look like in DC. But I know also through our members that those are questions like, how do we get land where we can help support community with being able to live somewhere that is stable, but also stewarded by us, the individuals in the community. And so I think that that's also a big part of why I'm here. So thank you.
Thanks, Lady T. And Happy New Year. And let's pass it over to Kate. Oh, Susan, go ahead. You got your hand raised. You take it away.
Well, I'm especially interested. I'm always trying to get more trailer parks, into the co-op situation, resident owned. But it's really complicated. A lot of the parks are full of people who can barely pay their own rent. And so when they do manage to become cooperatively owned, they wind up with these like massive build, like infrastructure problems because these parks have been so like, you know, unmaintained by the previous landlords. And then it becomes a really difficult to get any sort of assistance when you're not officially like some sort of nonprofit, And so that's becoming like a complication for the various parks here in Colorado that like when they set up through Rock USA has them set up as a not-for-profit co-op, which is not the same as a nonprofit, So it seems like something really important that we need to figure out here.
Thanks, Susan. And actually, I also do want to share that one of our speakers, Nicholas Johnson, has a hard stop at 3:30. So I'd like to go ahead and pause the intros for now so that we can make sure he gets a little time to share his experiences with this. And then we'll come back after we get through that stuff. We'll come back just to hear more from you all and what you're interested in talking about today. So I'm just going to very briefly share the agenda, and then we'll jump in, kick it over to you, Nicholas. Okay, so everyone see my screen? Okay, so today we just started with a little intro. We're going to do just a quick overview of what is a discount sale, different kinds, and then talk about closing a transaction, specifically, Nicholas, your experience and what it took from a technical, legal, real estate side to do the first transaction that we did with Julia, who's joining us today. And then we'll talk about starting a discount sale program and go into questions. So also there's kind of a broader definition called seller leverage because there are many kinds of ways that people who own property can contribute it toward permanent affordability. So again, it could be donating a property outright, or it could be selling it to a community land trust or other nonprofit below the appraised market value and then realizing a tax deduction from that. So why is this a beneficial thing to think about and to work with your community on? So one, new construction costs are incredibly crazy, I think everywhere across the country. So when you can find folks in your community that have existing housing that they would want to contribute, that is a much more cost-effective way to get it done. With the contributions of folks in our community coming together to do it. So affordable housing system broken, people are starting to notice. So again, it's something that's high on people's minds, particularly folks who have bought properties that have appreciated greatly and may not feel like great that, they may not need to get all that profit and, feel like they are passionate about protecting their neighborhood from gentrification and want another family to appreciate the home like they did. Particularly around like economic and racial equity work and disparities. And some people want to leave a legacy in their community. So there are different kinds of discount transactions. So there's a direct donation of a home. So again, just a straight donation and you get a tax deduction for that donation, which again can be realized over 5 years. There can be a discounted sale where again it's sold to the CLT or other nonprofit below the market value. There's retained life estates, bequests, option bequests, life income gifts, which are more technical, which I will actually take this opportunity we'll actually come back to that once we get to Nicholas's piece. I've got a couple examples of these. And actually, we modeled our program based off the City of Lake CLT, who we had a consultant who worked with us who helped us start that organization. And like over the last 2-3 years or so, they had 6+ opportunities for folks who sold to them in Minneapolis at a discount of some kind. And again, they had lots of inquiries, and a lot of it was also around when George Floyd was murdered through the lens of trying to impact racial disparities and racial equity, as being able to sell their home or donate their home as a way to contribute toward that. Some of them were also nonprofit partners. So if there are other nonprofits that are needing to get rid of properties, that is another option. So again, with their program, they suggested at least a 20% discount as kind of the minimum to make it worthwhile for the community land trust. But on average, they experience more like a 41% discount in terms of the total value of the home. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Nicholas to just talk a little bit about this first transaction that we did with Julia and Victor.
Hey, thanks, Alvin. Happy Monday, everybody. I appreciate everybody joining us for especially to talk about the transaction. Thanks to Julia for joining us as well. So I just definitely want to kind of provide some of the mechanics behind doing a discounted sale, and of course, Julia will be able to share kind of her experience on the donor side. So, of course, as Alvin said, Julia was the um, basically the seller and the donor at the same time. And it's one of the things that makes it very unique because you're not asking the homeowner to donate the home in its entirety for, below its fair market value of the home. You're basically buying the home at a discounted valuation. In this particular case, we had worked with another realtor to kind of give us maybe a desktop valuation of what they thought the home might be worth. Um, and I believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Alvin, I think it came back between, because we get a low, a mid, and a high. But just the bottom and the top of that was kind of like the 285 to maybe 325 range. And of course, we're working in conjunction with our land trust. Was that um, our land trust, of course, had proceeds to contribute toward the acquisition, of course, and the traditionally when our buyer was an individual, of course, we went through the whole process of doing like an income qualification for them to be able to meet eligibility. And the standard that we created was about we were targeting individual households at about 60% AMI. So, for example, a typical home buyer was, a family of four earning roughly about $52,000, $53,000 a year or less. And so it helped us to kind of get a good insight as to, okay, what this individual would be able to afford, and also look at kind of what was the price point. So, of course, if a home is valued at, four or 500,000, it's a lot more difficult, being that the maximum contribution that we had with our CLT was about $100,000. And so generally for us, our home buyer would go out and secure a primary mortgage or a first mortgage that would be somewhere in between the range of about 75 up to about $200,000. So, with the average home in Indianapolis being about 260,000, we really, by doing a combination of using the CLT program, focusing on 60% AMI, plus finding sellers who were willing to be a donor or receive a portion of their benefit in terms of compensation for their home, being a combination of the sales price minus what the balance that was owed, and then providing a deduction or helping them to secure a deduction for the difference between the fair market value and the actual sale price of the home. So it's definitely a major joint effort between the buyer, the CLT buyer, and the seller to try to make the numbers work. And of course, our good friends at the IRS, they generally what they want to see is that they want to give a deduction for a home sale to a nonprofit, which actually kind of added like a second layer of potential benefit for this particular case, because rather than the buyer, the CLT buyer, also being just an individual The CLT buyer was a nonprofit. So in actuality, in the example that we have on our first case, the buyer is the CLT buyer is a nonprofit, and then the which is the buyer of the improvements, right? The home and all the improvements above ground, and then the actual CLT is still the purchaser of the land. So you actually have in the transaction with Julia having two nonprofits being involved in it. So we built it to be able to work both ways because we wanted to make sure that if the buyer was a nonprofit, we could still provide that tax deduction in exchange for a reduced price. In this particular case, the purchase price um, was about 200,000, and uh, we agreed to make the transaction pretty much cost neutral, meaning all of the closing costs um, that would traditionally be either split between the buyer and seller or closing costs that would be paid outright by the seller. We agreed to be able to cover those costs to make sure that, you know, not only were we, showing, some gratitude and thanks, of course, for, being able to buy, an amazing property that was, you know, you know, of the four transactions that we did in 2025, it was definitely the most valuable property, and what it actually allowed us to do by buying the house at a sales price of 200,000. Um, the balance when we got the payoff was only about 100 and a little bit over $190,000 in the 190s, but with all the closing costs and everything involved, we were able to keep, all things, under $215,000 to make sure that the transaction closed with taking care of all the title fees. Um, we were, of course, we've worked with transactions where we had realtors both on the buyer side and the seller side. But in this case, because we were buying directly as a nonprofit who was actually working directly with the CLT and administering the program and actually really and truly kind of blessed to be able to kind of form the relationship with Julia and her husband Victor. We were able to basically save 6% on the transaction cost because we didn't have um, a buyer's realtor and a seller's realtor. We were able to basically do the transaction in-house. We did still sign, purchase agreement and an addendum to the purchase agreement, which is our two primary documents to do our transactions. And then in addition to that, we were able to, agree on our timeline, all the coverage of some of the additional closing costs, things of that nature, in particular like property taxes. And for this as well, the IRS requires that there be a IRS approved appraisal done no more than 2 months prior to the transaction, but no later than the deadline for the following year in which the property taxes are to be, I mean, not the property taxes, but the personal income tax return is to be filed. So in this case, we closed this transaction around the third week of December, and which says that basically we could do the appraisal as early as like the third week of October, but no later than April 15th, which is the traditional deadline for filing taxes unless you file for an extension, which would bump it out to October 15th. In this case, we had already found uh, uh, an appraiser, and so we engaged them We gave them the IRS forms that needed to be signed and completed. Of course, they have to be signed by the appraiser. A copy of the appraisal has to be attached, and then the seller has to sign the IRS form. The buyer has to sign the IRS form, seller being the individual who's going to get the IRS deduction, and then the buyer being the nonprofit who, of course, is able to show that they're a 501c3 in good standing with the IRS, also in good standing with the Secretary of State office in which the nonprofit was incorporated. And by doing that and providing that documentation, we're able to provide a deduction. And the way the deduction work is they generally want to keep it at about 30% of the donor's adjusted gross income, and they allow you to carry the deduction forward for up to 5 years. So, for example, um, we said that if the appraisal came back at and I'm just picking a number in between 300,000 and we bought at 200 plus closing costs and say we closed at 215, there's $85,000 between the value and the actual cost of the purchase. That $85,000 is what the maximum of the deduction could be. If the gross income for Victor and Julia, say the gross income was $100,000, well, the deduction, of course, they do have a son. So after they deducted, for the child care tax, their standard deduction, or if they itemized their taxes, and if it came out that they owed, they would be able to apply the deduction first to any taxes owed, and then anything once they zeroed out the tax burden after calculating their adjusted gross income. If say we only use $30,000 of that 80,000 or 85,000, they would be able to carry forward the remaining 55,000 for up to 5 years. So it's a very nice tax benefit. It's not refundable, meaning that if there was $85,000 of deduction right against their adjusted gross income, they used 30 because that would have been how much they would have owed in federal taxes. Because this doesn't apply to well, here in Indiana it doesn't apply for Indiana state income taxes. This specific deduction applies to federal, but basically what it does is um, by allowing them to carry it forward 5 years, they're really able to, if a person's effective tax rate, say it was, a higher, a high net worth family, and generally when you sell and you have a lot of equity in a home, it can, if especially if there's, if you're at 100% or higher or 120% of area median income. So for Indianapolis, 100% would be right at about 100,000 for a family of four. If you're over that 100,000, your tax burden grows exponentially because we do have both a city income tax and we also have a state income tax. And then, of course, we all have to pay the federal. So what it really does is potentially save the donor roughly 30% of what they would have had to pay against, well, it could wipe out all of their federal tax if, up to that 30% deduction limit. But it basically over the course of if you combine their local, which is city county, because we have a consolidated government here, city county tax, plus their state and plus their federal, our state income tax rate is much less than than the federal, of course, which goes up to like 38%. Our
And
state,
Nicholas, real quick, I know we're going to be short on time for folks, but I want to make sure we have a chance for anyone with legal questions to ask them while we have Nicholas on here, who's kind of our transactional and kind of legal eye on it. And Nicholas, do you mind doing just a quick intro, like who you are?
for sure, for sure. I'm sorry, I jumped right into it.
No
Uh,
worries.
my name is Nicholas Johnson. I've been practicing law since 2015, and I focus my practice on corporate and commercial law, and of course, commercial includes real estate. I've I've been self-employed for about the last 8 years, and we provide just different transactional support. We provide, a lot of banking and financial services, kind of law services as well, in terms of securing loans, both for nonprofits, going out and securing tax credits. So a lot of things that have to do with money, real estate in supporting either small businesses or nonprofits, um, inclusive of getting incentives from state and local government. So that's basically been what I've done on the legal side. But before that, I've been a community and economic development professional since 2005, so a little bit over 21 years, and have been happy to say we've called Indianapolis home for about the last 13 years. Um, so those are just kind of some background information about myself.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicholas. Are there any questions that people want to ask Nicholas specifically? And again, this is a lot of information, so we'll make sure we send the recording out along with like the forms and things that Sarah, thank you for putting them in the chat.
And that's
Alvin,
that,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I put a question in the chat, but it might be a little in the weeds. But it got me thinking about some other opportunities where people might be able to donate. But essentially, folks who are going into skilled nursing, is there any way they could potentially sell with maybe a second mortgage, so that it would look like the house is being sold at fair market value? So, like a lot of folks are going into skilled nursing, they have Medicaid would require the house that be sold at fair market value, but if you could sell it to a CLT with like a second forgivable mortgage, where the actual purchase price looks like it's fair market value, but yeah, I was trying to figure out that would be a really there'd be a lot of people that would be very interested in doing that, because they're not really interested in netting as much for their property too. And if you're particularly if you're a community based person, it might be it may not be any way to do that, but I was just wondering if it would be work.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, of course, a little bit more information about the because you brought up the skilled nursing and things of that nature. I think the one major point, a couple of the kind of details that you share in your question that stand out are that one is you're trying to still sell the home at fair market value. You're also attempting to have both a primary mortgage and a secondary mortgage, like a first lien and a second lien mortgage. Um,
Yeah.
there's nothing that prevents you from being able to have a first and a second. We've actually looked at it with the CLT as well about if if we want to sell in the future, because Kepler as a whole owns the house outright, they could provide some sort of seller financing, or
Yeah.
if the buyer wanted to buy the home but only qualified for a lesser amount than what the home was going to be sold for, then that would be another opportunity to have a second mortgage as well. But it's definitely a structure with having a first and a second is something that can definitely be done. The particulars about um, still obtaining, because the true benchmark as far as for the tax deduction at the federal level is capturing the difference between the fair market value and the sales price. So as long as the sales price is reflected in the purchase agreement, and the value of the home is documented in the appraisal, those are the two key numbers.
Okay.
Question, do you have time to stay or do you need to get off the call?
I'm sorry, say that one more time. Is that
Still have
Sandy?
time for another question?
Yeah, I've got time for another question.
Okay. I am well, first gonna apologize that I got pulled to a couple things. So you might have said some things that I just missed, but I'm trying to make sense of the CLT making the purchase. So is the initial transaction 100% just with the CLT and the CLT is the owner, or are you trying to do that whole transaction with the ultimate end buyer of the house and the CLT is just closing the transaction with the real estate, the buyer of the house, with the seller all at the same time?
So we do it as a tri-party transaction. And when I say tri-party, that's the seller, the CLT buyer, right? Which is the individual, and then the actual CLT. So the CLT is one of the two buyers. The CLT does execute a agreement for the purchase of the land only, and then the buyer execute a purchase agreement for the purchase of the improvements only. And then jointly combined, the total transaction is reflective of both of those purchase agreements, and then closed in a single transaction.
Real quick, and I'll just add to that piece. In this case, with Julia's house and with discount sales, there's a little difference in that in order to get the tax deduction, it has to be sold to the nonprofit at a discount. So in that case, and again, it could happen all at once in the same closing. Again, the house is sold to the CLT or nonprofit, and then the improvements are then sold to the, if it's going to be, bought by a homeowner that meets the charitable mission of the community land trust or organization, then that's kind of how the seller gets the discount. In this case with Julia's house, it was a little different because it was two nonprofits buying it. So NDCLT, we're finishing up our pilot program for home buyer choice, and our last candidate lost their mortgage qualification, and we had some remaining funds that had to be spent by the end of December, which was allowed us to have funds to purchase Julia's home, plus Kepra put in the difference. So it was really a transaction, and we're turning it into a permanently affordable rental house for, again, Bakaya, who's one of the team members, who's been a community leader with three boys, who again meets the charitable mission of what we're trying to accomplish. So again, whenever it's to get the tax deduction, it goes to a nonprofit first. And then if you want it to be home ownership, then you transfer it to that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nicholas. And thanks, Sandy. Great question. And I will put in the chat, again, this is a lot of information, but I'm a member owner of a consulting cooperative called Scarabus Consulting. So if you'd like to sit down more one-on-one, there's a Calendly link to book like a more of a one-on-one session that we can dig into this topics or other topics as well. Anyone else have any? Nicholas, you got to hop off. Or are there any other last final questions or thoughts that you have?
Well, one is I just want to make sure everybody knows we're going to. I have like some of the materials from going through the process. I'll make sure to send those to Alvin. One being the IRS form specifically, two the requirements for what is a qualified IRS appraisal, right? And then we have like boilerplate documents related to the purchase agreement. So if that, if that needs to be shared as well, or if that's an interest to the group, we'll make that available as well. And then of course, just continue to reach out for to Alvin if he want to set up individual time for a specific, project that you may be either thinking about starting or maybe in the process of actually trying to close.
Awesome. And Vanessa, I saw in the chat you had a question.
Hi, I do. Hi, Nicholas. Hi, Alvin. Apologies. I did join a little late. So you might have covered this, but I'm very interested in like when it comes to purchasing a mixed use building. that where there's like an active tenant association where they're building, where they're working towards fundraising to um um acquire the building, right? Because right now it's on temporary, it's being held by temporarily stewards. Um, so like my question is like when it comes to the whole uh purchase agreement, like you mentioned like a purchase agreement for the COT for the land, a purchase agreement for the COT for the tenants. Does that mean that the COT like there needs to be like an appraisal, which it's very common, right? Where like the COT is only purchasing the value of the land and the tenants are purchasing like the value of the improvements. Um, are there like any mortgage loans or like loans that would be a good fit for like this type of model? Just curious. And sorry, like I was rambling. I was like brainstorming right now the question.
Yeah, no worries. I could take the question, and then Alvin, of course, feel free to jump in as well. So, so one is you can use um, a CLT model with mixed use development. Um, One of the things you have to, well, there's several things like in most transactions that you want to pay in particular attention to. One is that your the ability to bifurcate the land from the improvements. And when I say bifurcate, I mean you're separating the value of the land. Now, we're not actually separating the value of the land and property, meaning like if the house is worth 200 and the land underneath is worth 50, the CLT owns the $50,000 of value of land and the buyer owns the 200,000 value of home. Now, it's true that the home is owned by the buyer of the improvements, and the land is owned by the CLT, but those values are in particular they could be the public values that the county may have for property tax valuations, but in particular when you're trying to get a tax deduction, you're really looking at the fair market value. So there's going to be a valuation in the appraisal that's going to show you the value of the land as well as the value of the improvements. The other thing that you mentioned is that there's a tenant association. One of the things that Community Land Trust CLTs run into is that if you buy a home that has a HOA or a homeowners association or a tenant association, they may have language in their bylaws of the tenant association or the HOA that prevent the land from being the improvements in the land from being bifurcated, meaning that if if the mixed use development was built with the ability to be what we call condoed out, meaning individual units in the property, like if there's suites or if there's individual apartments, if they're able to be sold based on a physical address and then they're allowed to have common space, that's what we call being condoed, then the HOA or the tenant association would then be that is more aligned with what you would see with a CLT. But we have seen instances where a HOA or tenant association has language in their bylaws that don't allow there to be a separation of the land from the actual improvements above the ground.
And Vanessa, are you also asking in terms of the seller getting a discount when they sell it?
Uh,
Or is the ownership status who owns it now?
yeah, I mean, I think so because if it's being owned by the COT, then they would qualify for a welfare tax exemption. Is that something that goes into it once the transaction once we're working towards escrow closing, or is that something that comes in after?
Can you repeat it one more time? They're looking for what extension?
The welfare tax exemption.
Okay.
For the property taxes, is that something that gets factored in after the transaction closes or before, like during the deal?
So So, of course, as you would probably already understand, each individual jurisdiction has their own property tax laws that allow you to qualify for different exemptions. Here in Indianapolis, Marion County, we don't have an income-based exemption. There are like two that exist for, of course, seniors, and there's another one that exists for individuals with disabilities or with veteran status. Or they could have, but you can only apply one exemption. Otherwise, the only other exemption would be the homestead exemption, which, if you're in Indiana, you have to be the owner of the home on a fee simple basis. And this has been one of those areas of kind of conflict that we've had run up against is that when you do a project as a CLT or transaction as a CLT where there's three parties, the property is no longer held in a fee simple transaction because the owner of the home no longer owns both the home and the land. It's now separated. So we don't have the ability to layer multiple tax deductions for our buyers here locally. Now, of course, we could take a look, or work with counsel in the
Yeah.
jurisdiction
And
that
I'll
you're
just
in.
add in, consult a legal professional in your jurisdiction.
Yeah,
None
for
of this
sure.
is legal advice, just our experience.
Yeah.
But also, I do want to add, I put in the chat some, you asked about loan fund stuff. So these are ones that we came across at a co-op housing conference, which are different community development financial institutions, which are basically nonprofit banks, some of which specialize in lending to cooperatives. But again, just like we had said, if you wanted the seller to have a discount, it goes to the nonprofit first and then could be sold to the cooperative from the nonprofit and or condos to the individual households. And with that, I do want to go ahead and so we can make sure we get time for Julia to speak. Let's all thank Nicholas for his support in here.
Thank you, everybody. It's very nice to see you all.
Yeah, thank you, Nicholas. Appreciate you. And I will go ahead and pass it over to Julia just to share a little bit about yourself and your story and experience.
Okay, yeah, happy to share what I can. I guess I can start by saying that I don't have experience or expertise in this realm. So same kind of questions you would ask Nicholas should not be fielded towards me, but I think that's to say that, I mean, the flip side of that is that, to sell your house to a CLT does not require you to have expertise in any way. I mean, I think people who sell their homes, they get a realtor, they rely on the realtor for the expertise. And in this case, it was similar. We didn't have a realtor, but the CLT provided the expertise that was needed for this to happen. I had, however, heard about CLTs, back in a class that I took for a master's program. I love the concept. So when I heard that there was one in Indianapolis, and then we were also at the point of selling our home, it seemed like a great fit. And then it just so happened to be that, this was still, the CLTs just getting started. So we just happened to be the first seller to it. So, I mean, my area, I'm a adult ESL instructor who has done a career pivot recently, and I'm now homeschooling my son. My husband is in the medical field. He's an emergency medicine doctor. We've lived in Indianapolis for 8 years. The home that we sold was the home we had lived in the whole time we were here. And we were building a house, so we had some flexibility on the sale time as well. And then we had been in touch with the CLT kind of through the process. And like a lot of what Alvin said about what it would be kind of the people who would kind of be ones who would be likely to sell at a discount would, we fit that description very well. People who understand that the affordable housing system is broken and want to do something about it. And to be in a position to where that could work. I think also the price point that we were working at kind of fit well with the CLT. We weren't looking at, we didn't have a house that was 400,000 or higher or something like that. But any higher than what we had would have been hard. If it was any lower, it probably would have been a lot easier. But it felt very efficient, the process, but, like they knew what they were doing. We knew that, we wanted to sell, and we just kept checking in with them, making sure that, this is still good. The documents that they have created, you read through them, like it's actually able to understand their documents, as opposed to a lot of real estate documents that just need to be explained to you, and you still aren't quite sure you understand what's happening. And yeah, as Nicholas was describing how the deduction works, I can't speak to that, yet in terms of how that works for us or what that specifically looks like, since the appraisal hasn't been done yet. But again, it sounds like a perfect piece to have that to come out of the transaction that works in our favor in pretty much every way. So it really feels like there's got to be a lot of people out there that this could work for, and it using a lot of that same language and explaining how this is a way, the affordable housing system is broken, and this is a way for people to do something about it that's not just a one-time sale type of thing. Like it can get housing into the permanent stock of affordable housing. It feels like that's a very impactful message to share with people who could be at this point. It's just a matter of how do you share that message, right? Like your typical realtor is not going to say, well, hey, there's the CLT option, but I don't know, maybe there's a way to get more realtors aware. Yeah, I don't know if there's any questions that anyone has, but yeah, I'm happy to answer anything.
Okay, questions for Julia? Go ahead, Sandy.
Surprise. Sorry, like I'm hogging the show here. I'm just curious through the process, there's this aspect of legal advice, and then there's serious tax advice. So did you seek your own tax consultant based on your exact scenario to really be sure that you were maximizing your desired tax benefit based on your actual true tax scenario?
We did not. I think that we just figured that, kind of facing this as kind of a gift style situation, that like we'll see what it comes back as, but not necessarily trying to maximize anything. So I guess it would be curious to know if there was like a, because like Nicholas was saying, if it was a certain, it's between these two numbers, and then there could be, this maximum. So knowing but then like we didn't have an appraisal done beforehand to necessarily know like, oh, so here's what the appraisal comes out as, so we'll try to put the selling point here. Our thinking was just like, we originally bought at 200, then we refinanced when things got lower, so it was actually 215. We brought it down to 200 where we're living in, and then we just sold it again at 200. So it was really just a no gain but no loss in the sale for us. But yeah, I imagine that there could be a way to, for someone who's wanting to make a sale like this and do it more strategically, that someone could provide some advice.
So that wasn't that as important for you in the transaction. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. Well, Julie, I've got a question. If you could just succinctly share what led you and Victor, your husband Victor, to say, okay, we're going to do this. And then who else do you think might also be interested in doing something like this?
Yeah, good question. So I think when we knew the CLT was an option, for one, like from the get-go, when we were going to do it, I think one of the first things you guys did was like, we met with you personally and started to, we asked some basic questions and we got to know each other. And from then on, it felt, from the beginning, it felt like a relationship more than a basic transaction, which I felt like we would have gone through with a transaction either way, but it really, like, I think that for others who might consider it, and it can feel out of the norm, and all, like, the more that you can, like Alvin did, foster some relationship along the way, I think that could go a long way for people to step out of the system, because I think that the typical housing sales structure is so strong that you step out of it and you could immediately get just like bowled over with all that. Well, then you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this, and it's just so set the way that it typically goes. But so you can counter that, I think, with the relationship style. But then, I mean, I kept coming back to, if, like, we know that there's a need for affordable housing, and this is a way to make it into permanent stock. And even though, like, this is just one house and the need is in the thousands in Indianapolis, like, you don't get more if you don't have one to start. So, like, ours can hopefully lead to more people seeing it as something normal. Every person I've shared it with, at first the reaction is like, what? Like, what? It's just not how you sell a house. You sell it to maximize, right? So, but I think that the more that people hear someone they knew did this, and we're not like, like I said, I'm a teacher, my husband's a doctor, so we're not people that you would necessarily expect it to come from, I guess. Like, we're not in the nonprofit realm, at least currently. I've worked in a lot of nonprofits before, but so yeah, I mean, hearing it come from, just your typical family, I think is helpful too. And así es, Eva. Yeah, but yeah, this is something that is interesting to me.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Sandy. Sorry.
I could just extend Alvin's question. Like, what did you see through the process as like the real benefits? I mean, assuming you've been familiar as a buyer before or selling other real estate, like, what did you really experience through the process as different and beneficial with this path? Like, other than like people not having to traipse through your house with the realtor.
No, it's a good point, though. I would say that there really are a lot of benefits to this if there's people, who want that, like, not having to set up with showings and everything was huge for us. That was that would have been a lot extra. we, because we were, we were already looking at, we're selling where we're not going to be making any money. Like, we don't really have the funds to put forth much to do to the house. Like, I mean, it didn't have very many problems, but like, we didn't paint the house, and they got it painted after they bought it. I guess I don't want to necessarily promote that. Like, I felt bad that we didn't like have it painted, but okay, but it's something where like there's a lot of convenience as well, that like we were building. So I don't know if it's something where you could contact builders and if they've got people who have that convenience. But like, because we were like, well, we think the house might be ready in August, and then it was September, and then it was end of September. So like, we weren't dealing with a buyer that had a set, like, oh, we need this right now. It was convenient for the fact that our selling time was kind of unknown. And yeah, I feel like when it came down to it, there was also a lot less paperwork. I mean, this was also a sale. They were buying it, straight up cash and not as a mortgage. So there's a lot less paperwork involved there anyway. But I would say if you're not even looking at it in terms of trying to convince someone for the side that benefits society, it's a very convenient transaction for a seller.
Well, it has to be both for a lot of people, probably. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
That's awesome.
I mean, it's not just that it was, a thing that we were doing that felt like this is a way to help solve a problem, but not only that, it was also super convenient.
Yeah, awesome. The aspect you commented about not having to make the typical seller improvements could be huge, especially like in Indy. Nobody's going to buy a house that doesn't have a brand new kitchen, or it's going to really kill you in the sale. But I'm wondering, and maybe this is a question for later with Alvin, if like organizations like Habitat for Humanity are really taking advantage of this to be able to modify and then resell a home, but keep it in a community land trust so it protects the long-term affordability.
Mm-hmm. I just want to make sure, Ava, I saw you come off mute, and we can get to that. I don't know specifically about Habitat for Humanity, but they could do the same with other people who want to sell their homes to Habitat.
Ya, yo solo como esto me emociona mucho y empezando con una casa es genial porque es parte de motivar. Em, Siempre he pensado que para una lucha de querer transformar es concientizar y cómo poder tener esas historias de esos dueños que comparten y el por qué quieren vender una vivienda, un fideicomiso, porque es parte de desmercantilizar la tierra, cómo documentar eso en videos para hacerlos viral, para que empuje a otros dueños, para que se sensibilicen y concienticen, ¿verdad? Y tengamos más aliados que realmente se relacionen con la comunidad, donde, ¿por qué queremos este tipo de viviendas? Entonces, en mi pensar es volar más allá, ¿verdad? Pensar en cómo decirle a un dueño que hace esto, puedes dar un pequeño testimonio o no sé, un video donde, ¿por qué lo estás haciendo? ¿Cuál cambios harías con esto? ¿Y qué es lo que te motiva? Para motivar a otros dueños para que hagan este tipo de ventas y confíen que es mejor a un fideicomiso o a una alternativa de vivienda que va a cuidar a nuestras comunidades. Creo que en lo que pensé de estos, porque hace falta concientizar a muchos y el por qué y tocar esos corazones, porque estamos viviendo una necesidad de vivienda y que ellos podrían ser grandes colaboradores con ese granito de arena que harían para la vivienda. Solo eso, pero me emocionó esto.
Gracias, Eva. Sí, pues Alvin hice un video de mí y creo que van a hacer algo. pero no lo han hecho todavía, pero estoy pues en acuerdo contigo que hicimos como una motivación para nosotros, fue eso también de poder motivar a otros, porque somos como una familia que creo que otros podrían creer que, pues, yo no soy tan diferente que ellos, sí, tal vez. Um, pero sí, tal vez. um, pero sí, yo creo que podría ser un video viral, ¿no?
Yeah, get ready. We're going to do another video with Lakaya and her kids moving in. And,
Oh, good. Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
do something and put it out there. And thank you, Ava. Are there any other questions specifically for Julia? All right, let's give Julia a round of applause. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you're welcome to stick on for the rest of this. We're just going to go into like for people who want to create their own programs for a discount sale, how to do that and some resources for it. Okay, let me start the share again. I know that was a lot of information, so let's just take 3 deep breaths. Quick pause. Breathe in. And then breathe out. And this is for me too. Breathe in. Hold it. And breathe out. Last one. Breathe in. And breathe out. And then stretch too if you want to. All right, so this is the home stretch. So hopefully this has been good resources so far. And the kind of goal for the rest of this presentation is for your own organizations. If you want to have do something like this, it really doesn't take a lot to get started. Really what it took to get started was we created a one-pager handout for our website, and like a page on our website that talked about, this is what it is, and to talk to people about it. We also held like a workshop where we did like a little video workshop, just sharing, these are the kind of opportunities people can contribute, even if they don't have a bunch of cash laying around, if they want to contribute to what we're doing. Okay, so let me really quick go back to some of these other options because we didn't really talk about it too much. And again, I'm not the lawyer, so please consult like a legal person on these specific kind of examples. So in addition to like the discount sale, because we've only had experience with the discount sale and not these other ones yet, there's a retained life estate where a donor transfers ownership to the CLT, but retains the right to live in a property for a specific period of time, which can be like the remainder of their life, and then it passes to the CLT. So just how it works, again, they sign the deed over to the CLT, but legally retain the right to live there until they pass away or move out. The CLT owns the remainder interests, the future ownership, while the donor keeps the life estate, the right to live there. And just like as an example, imagine Robert, an 80-year-old retired teacher in a gentrifying neighborhood. He owns his home and wants to remain affordable for another teacher someday, isn't ready to leave. He deeds the home over to the CLT today. Because he gave away future ownership, you get a massive income tax deduction now. Even though he still lives there, he can continue to pay his own property taxes, utilities. It's kind of based on the agreement that the CLT has with the person who lives in the home and owns the home. So that's like one option for folks who are particularly more elderly and might want to contribute, but need their home to live in. Bequest, so it's similar to leaving like property in a will to a loved one. You could bequest the property upon death to the organization, the CLT, or another nonprofit. And then an option bequest, so that could give the CLT an option to purchase the property from like the people who inherit it at a certain discount of the appraised value. So someone could put in their bequests, they want to leave an inheritance to their kids, but they also want it to remain like permanently affordable, or some of the proceeds for it to go into the land trust. They could say, hey, we I'm going to leave it to my kids, but I'm going to have them sell it at 40% discount of the appraised value, give the CLT a chance to purchase it. And then there's one that's like life income gift, where this one's a little more complicated, where basically the property is sold to a trust that they set up, not a community land trust, but a trust that then invests that money, and they get a monthly payment every month from the investment, and whatever's left over in that trust could go to the CLT afterwards. So there are just a whole lot of different options. Again, we'll send out these materials. So if you're curious about any of these specific ones, you would want to talk to like your own lawyer or like resource that you have locally for these kind of things. So how do you operationalize a discount program like this? So I would say start with a one pager. And again, I sent out they were put in the chat, and I also sent it out in an email, editable Word documents where you can just change the name of the organization on it. And for the most part, I think it'll be a very similar process for almost all organizations. So again, build a relationship. So like on our website, we just have a page that is specific to and I'll put it in the chat too, selling or donate a property to the community land trust. So putting that out there might lead people to say, hey, I can do this. This is an option. Here's information I can read on it before I talk to somebody. And then we also have like an intake form at the bottom for people who are interested in like setting up a session to talk. You could also use Calendly. I would actually probably suggest that over having like the forum maybe. And then again, let's see. So that we have like on here, this is like our one pager, which just describes like, here's what the process looks like. So it starts with a conversation between the owner and the community land trust. The CLT is seeking at least sorry, I'm going to try and get this so you can read it, is seeking a 20% discount off the appraised value of the property is kind of the baseline. And that's kind of like, if they're interested in that, you can keep going. The CLT will order and pay for so this is like what Nicholas was mentioning, just kind of a ballpark figure of what the price is. Which again, before we go any further, getting appraisal or doing purchase agreement, having a ballpark will let the CLT know if they can make it work, and let the home seller know if they can make it work, because they may have pay off their existing mortgage. They may need some money for a down payment on their next house. So again, you want to just make sure it's a relationship and a conversation where you're looking for a win-win. So what does that person need, and what is also in the best interest of the community land trust too? CLT orders and pays for the appraisal. CLT helps write up the purchase agreement. Again, if you've got legal expertise on your team who've done real estate transactions, or a realtor who's on your team or a partner realtor that is willing to do transactions pro bono or at a discount, they could help facilitate this whole process, which again saves the seller 6%, which again makes it so they can provide that discount. So again, that's definitely a benefit. No inspection contingency. So again, taking the house as is. And the idea is the CLT would make repairs, any necessary repairs after the transaction. So again, comparing if it'll work with the person who's selling's timeline and the CLT's timeline. So again, it may not be like certain right away whether it can work, but it kind of, again, has to line up with the funding that your organization CLT has to acquire properties and to rehab it, and when the seller needs to sell their house too. Let's see. Is there anything else really important? Okay, the step 4 is again developing a pro forma, which is just the idea, okay, it's going to cost us $8,000 to paint and fix the drywall. At that point, will it be affordable to the seller that we're trying to sell to? So the idea, but if, for instance, again, the example we talked about, Julie's house needed very, very minor repairs, cosmetic repairs, but there could be a house that needs very major rehab that could be $50,000, $100,000, and maybe even like serious like structural issues that end up making the house property more of a liability than like an asset necessarily. Again, most things can be fixed, but it requires money. So you have to decide kind of as an organization, is this a property that we want to have the capacity to take on managing, both from the management construction perspective and also the financial perspective. And after we make those investments, will it be affordable to the seller, the home buyer, or the renter that we're trying to work with? And then the appraisal, again, have an appraisal, you actually close on the house, you do the appraisal, and then you give that tax form, which is form 8283 to the seller. So again, that shows what the appraisal is, how much they sold it to you for, and thus the difference in that is what their tax deduction is, which they can claim over 5 years. So they can claim it in 1 year, or they can spread it out depending on what's best for their tax situation. Okay, yeah, that's basically what we just talked about here. Okay, and that's the one pager. This is the tax form 8283. Best practices for solar leverage program. So keep a one pager up to date on the website. Again, have a real estate entity, broker, or like real estate lawyer who can help you do the transactions. Ask the seller or donor to refrain from enlisting a realtor if possible. Again, that saves the 6% transaction fees. Encourage the seller donator, if they're able, to pay or share the closing costs. Or cover other TISH, I think, of truth in sales costs. Conduct a thorough property, but again, that's like about the relationship and the situation. So whatever feels right. Conduct a thorough property walkthrough and develop a solid scope of work. So again, understanding exactly what it's going to cost to fix up the homes for the next person living in it. Get familiar with the tax form, know how to fill it out, have an appraiser ready to do the appraisal, keep a running list of opportunities. Again, there could be a whole pipeline, if the word gets out. And it could take, we started talking to Julia like a year and a half, 2 years ago, when like she first joined the Community Land Trust and was floating the idea. So again, these are longer term relationships that again develop as win-wins again as the opportunity comes out of the ground. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. So again, like looking at how, it may not be exactly what you want, but it could be still helpful because again, it's the donated equity is equity that you don't have to fundraise for or get federal or government funding in order to create the housing that you want. Constantly be talking about the program, just like fundraising. So again, it was mentioned earlier about realtors. So we have a realtor on our board that we want to, again, help to educate other realtors about the community land trusts. And I think this one would be a big one for people who, again, have a growing consciousness of the affordable housing crisis, that this could be an option that particularly realtors who resonate with the same idea of creating affordable housing and preventing gentrification, which we know a couple, like that could be a thing that they educate their clients on. And again, well, like most people do it, probably not, but there could be a couple that really are interested in doing it. In particular, at our last annual meeting, one of our members mentioned that particularly people who have parents who pass away, or elderly people who pass away, that then kids are inheriting the home that they have no intention on living in, that this could be, again, a way to reduce the challenge of selling it. Again, a lot of times that's going to be as is, it's going to be in probate, kind of complicated. So there could be an opportunity for the descendants, inheritors, to contribute a legacy for their family while also being able to recoup some value out of the house for their inheritance. Let's see. Again, having a real estate partner is helpful. That gives you a discount or pro bono service. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it there and ask if there's any questions. And or how can people see using this in your own communities?
Alvin, how did you become a community land trust in the first place?
Good question. So, so I've been a part of Kepler Institute for about 15 years now, which is a community empowerment organization that helped to incubate and create the Indianapolis Community Land Trust. Kepler really is a platform for community-led projects like the Community Land Trust that was really brought to us by some of our friends and neighbors in community that, well, one, we kind of heard about it separately at a conference that Pambana, one of Kepler's founders, went to and learned about community land trusts. So she came back saying, hey, this is a great idea, because we've had a lot of like community conversations on gentrifications over the years. And I think we're always looking at, okay, what can we do about the problem? Not just the idea that someone should come and fix it and build a bunch of housing for us, but what are things that we can create, community institutions, to try and address it? So I think that's why community land trusts were really an inspiring story about how a lot of different communities around the country and world have done that themselves with their community. So after that, we also had a neighbor and friend and community come to us about joining Right to the City and around starting a community land trust, because one of the community development corporations locally here was looking at community land trusts and starting one. And then we joined Right to the City Alliance and kind of started a monthly community group that got together to talk about starting a community land trust, the Homes for All Indy Coalition. And then, like 2.5 years after that, and I've been involved with the project for about 4 years now. We had a relationship with the former deputy mayor, Jeff Bennett, who, when the COVID money was coming down, was like, hey, you all should put a request in, like give us a proposal. So the city helped to provide startup funds for incubating the CLT with the support of Kepler Institute. And then we also Kepler applied for and got a grant to do our pilot project for our home buyer choice program, which is where we provided up to $100,000 for 4 home buyers under 60% of the area median income to be able to buy a house on the market. So again, most of the first 3 home owners in the CLT bought a house just on the regular market, one of which was developed by a nonprofit. So again, that was also a good partnership. But this 4th one was the house that we bought from Julia with a partnership with Kepler Institute and turned into a permanently affordable rental property. So that's kind of the short version. But there's been all kinds of lessons that we've learned along the way about politics, about real estate, about how do you create a program. I think really we were looking at how can we create a program that doesn't take a whole lot of capacity to run, in terms of, we're not housing developers, we're not construction people and construction managers. So is there a way that we can use existing housing in our neighborhood, particularly with the cost of new construction? We were like, I just don't know if this is that's the right way to go. I think there's some benefits for sure in terms of lower maintenance and creating more housing supply. But in terms of what we felt like we had the capacity to do, that's where we, again, through relationships, we built a relationship with Dr. Ashley Allen of Houston Community Land Trust, that used a similar model that kind of led us to the home buyer choice model, buying houses on the market. Thanks for the question, Susan. Well, I do have a question. Is there anyone out there that thinks that people, has anyone in your own communities expressed some interest in something like this? Do you feel like there is interest in something like this? And you may not know until it happens and someone says, hey.
Hey, so I think that in DC, this is something that our general community and membership are asking for and talking about. But I like that you guys had kind of talked about being intentional about the legal parts of it, because DC land is federally owned land and whatnot. and then kind of trying to understand how that plays a part in the homes that sit on that land and not necessarily having what we would consider true ownership, even as a nonprofit collective. So, but I think this is resonating a lot. We have also, like I said, going from tenant associations to tenant unions and kind of seeing the bigger picture as housing cooperatives. And being able to try and change the unfortunate trajectory that's been happening in DC with many of our cooperatives who are facing like challenges. And I think it just kind of comes down to having these conversations likely with individuals who are coming more so into that area of communal stewardship and trying to, essentially care for these different land areas, you know what I'm saying, things like that. So yeah, I really resonate with this.
Thanks, Lady T. And that did remind me, there is another example that we have a relationship with that's kind of in the pipeline in terms of like what we're talking to a friend of ours, Janine, who is the partial owner of a low-income housing tax credit project that is going to come out of its affordability period in the next couple of years. That she would like for it to transition to ownership of the people who live there now, which I think are mainly elderly people under 60% of the area median income, and to have the CLT's assistance in facilitating that. Again, that's like a much larger project, but I think it's the same model where they sell it below the market value. The owners get a tax deduction or tax benefit while also passing on, again, the benefit of keeping it affordable and not displacing the residents. So I do think in terms of it can be individual homes, but it could also be whole developments. It could be an apartment complex. It could be a low-income housing tax credit project that's coming out of affordability. And that could be a leverage point that if there are those kind of developments in your community, to start those conversations with the owners or the developers of them, and or put some pressure that, hey, this is another option that exists for, again, them to make that choice, or for other folks like development authorities or the city to also potentially recommend that they take that as a way of moving forward and not displacing the residents. Are there any last burning questions or thoughts? Well, thank you everyone for your time today, and we'll make sure to send out the recording and the materials that we talked about today. And we will be back next month, this time on the first Monday, February 2nd. Is that correct, Sarah?
Oh, wait, we are going to do every 2 months now.
Every 2 months, right. Thank you. Go ahead. I'll pass it to you for our next date.
Well, thank you. Round of applause for our folks.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everybody.
much, Alvin and Julia, and I know Nicholas is off, but yeah, y'all. So we have decided to do this peer learning session every 2 months. That's not to say that if something comes up that we really want to dig into, we can't make an exception. That is always an option. So we just want to keep this space very fluid. So keep an eye out on your calendar. I believe the next one, oh yeah, will be March 2nd. And that should already be reflected in your calendar. If not, I will update that. And then every few months after that. So just keep an eye out on your email. And if you have any specific topics that you'd like to cover, any specific presenters that you'd like to see here, please let me know. Again, this is our space, and we want to make sure that it's something that's that we're discussing things that are useful and that are helpful to you directly. I think that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Zara. And thanks everybody for joining today. Does anyone have any topics off the top of their head that are of interest for a peer learning group, or a group that we could learn from, or yourself that you'd like to share?
We have to think about that more.
Okay, think about it. Email Zara and I. Any topics you got?
All I care about is the trailer parks and the co-ops, you know. Loved hearing everything, you know, that Dre had said about that, you know. So more along those kind of lines. It's so complicated that the more the better when it comes to that.
Thanks, Susan.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Happy New Year.